at Atlanta's Hartsfield International Airport. Voting has just ended in Egypt. People went to the polls today in a second round of voting on a controversial Islamist-backed constitution. Let's get the latest from NBC's Ayman Mohyeldin, who's in Cairo. Ayman?
Good evening, Richard. In fact, polls have just closed here in Egypt in the second and final round of a historic referendum on a controversial constitution that has polarized the country. And just before the polls closed here, Egypt's vice president also announced that he is resigning. It is the latest indication that the country really is facing all kinds of political turmoil. Now, it's important to emphasize the vice president says he did not resign as a result of any political discontent among the leadership of the country, but since the President Mohamed Morsi announced a constitutional declaration on November 22nd, several high-ranking advisors to the president have resigned. The vice president's resignation is just the latest indication or signal that, in fact, the country's leadership is somewhat divided over this constitution. But it's not just the political establishment, it is the country at large that remains extremely polarized. In the first round of voting that took place last Saturday, nearly 56% of Egyptians voted yes to support this controversial constitution. 44% said no, and it is expected, with the results coming in a short while from now, that even in this second round, this constitution will in fact pass. The constitution has divided the country between Islamist political forces and those that oppose them. Those that support the constitution say it is important to get the institutions of the state back on track. Within 60 days of it being adopted, parliamentary elections will be held, and many people see that as a positive sign to transitioning Egypt to democracy. But opponents of the constitution say, in fact, it takes the country backwards to dictatorship. It does not represent the minorities, nor does it protect the rights of women, children, and other minority ethnic groups here in the country. So it comes against a very tumultuous time for Egyptians, to say the least. Richard.
All right, thank you, Ayman Mohyeldin, there live for us in Cairo, or actually moments ago. For more on what's at stake for Morsi's constitution and Egypt's future as a democracy, let's bring in Rula Jebreal. Rula is a journalist, filmmaker, and MSNBC contributor. She was raised in Arab East Jerusalem, and Mona Eltahawy, an Egyptian-American journalist based in New York. Thank you both. And Rula, I'll start with you. He was saying, Ayman, his reporting, some of the critics of what's happening at the moment, this takes the country backwards.
Takes the country backwards, especially in this moment where Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood are trying to grab all kinds of powers. One thing is to be elected with one and win with 51%. It's fine, because people have a chance to actually vote you out in 4 years. But the Constitution is actually the base for any future government and legislation. Look at the United States, for example. For any amendment of the Constitution, we have to approve each amendment in the two houses by 2/3. In addition to that, we have to approve any amendment actually by 3/4 by the states. So it's such an important document, such an important base for any legislation. You need that will unite people. What Morsi is doing is actually dividing the country further and further. For him, it's not about the country. It's not about the future generation. For him, it's about the Muslim Brotherhood.
Mona, if this is an Islamist-based constitution, and if there is this division there, according to what we're getting reports on the percentages, there is yet broad support for it.
Well, there isn't really that much of a broad support, because if you look at last week's results, prelim results, it was about 51 or 57% that approved. That's not a very wide margin. He needs at least 75% to say, you know, I have the majority of the country behind me. It's very important to understand the background to how Morsi became our president. He only got 25% in the first round of presidential elections, and he narrowly won in the second round against a very unpopular candidate, but who people were trying to portray as the savior from the Islamists. So what Morsi has to understand is that Egyptians voted for him to bring about jobs and to fulfill the goals of the revolution. But when we look at what happened in the referendum votes today, the amount of forgery and ballot boxing exceeds at times what the Mubarak regime used to do.
There have been some accusations about that. Actually, absolutely. There have been some concerns about that. Now, Morsi, though, in previous years had sort of skated on the outside, but now he has to deal with the very core of the way the country is operating. That's why we've seen a lot of unrest. This is he moves towards the issues of defense, for instance. Those are the things he did not touch before. What does that mean in terms of, even if this constitution is ratified at some point, for him, and what it means for his ruling there?
What Morsi is clearly failing in doing is bringing in the other political factions in Egypt. What the Muslim Brotherhood like to do is to say we're the majority majority and everybody else is just upset because they lost. And that's simply a lie. When you see hundreds of thousands of Egyptians on the street saying, where are your checks and balances, what they're essentially saying to the president of Egypt after a revolution is that you must take the whole country into consideration and be the president for Egyptians, not the president for the Muslim Brotherhood. He has to create jobs. He has to fix the economy. He has to bring tourism back. He will not do that as the Muslim Brotherhood president. He can only do that. Ayman said that we need to rebuild institutions and get them working again in Egypt. You can't do that as the Muslim Brotherhood president. You can only do that as the president of Egypt.
That's something he does not have experience doing in the past,
exactly.
Correct. That's not necessarily the platform that he worked on. So Mona, the question is, what can the opposition do now?
I think the opposition can do a lot, and I actually admire what Mona is doing, because she's pressing the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamists on women's issues, on freedoms, and it's such a valuable thing, because Morsi thought that he can really shove in the throat of the Egyptian what he's doing, and they will be fine with it, because he said, you know, I won the election in the name of, he doesn't have a full grasp of how democracy works. Democracy is about putting people together, listening to the women, listening to the Christians, and I think, but we shouldn't leave them alone. The truth is, Egyptians alone will not stop the Muslim Brotherhood agenda. Look, Mona's right. They won on a platform improving people's lives, the economy. People voted for them, not because Morsi was more handsome than Shafiq, simply because Shafiq was the man of the regime. But today they are expecting $4 billion from the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and $1.4 billion from the Congress. If you add this money, this will change the economy in Egypt, if you give them this money. So what you need to do is give them a set of conditions that actually Morsi has to apply for the way he governs.
Well, Mona, part of that money is, and we have to go after this, is what about women's rights under this? The $4 billion, his policies, this new constitution, perhaps?
Absolutely. What concerns me the most about Islamists like Morsi is that they will make these cultural and religious arguments that are absolutely baseless. Now, don't get me wrong, the Mubarak regime was no friend to women. But what concerns me about Morsi is that they wrap themselves around in religion, and I'm a Muslim, and they do not own Islam. And what concerns me about this particular constitution is that it was written very hurriedly by mostly old, ultra-conservative men. And the women who work with the Muslim Brotherhood, unfortunately, are women who've basically internalized their own subjugation. This revolutionary Egypt deserves much better than this.
All right, Mona Eltahawy, thank you so much. Rula Jebreal, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, will armed guards and police officers at schools nationwide become a reality? We'll let our brain